Alright, so I think it's recorded. Alright, so module 1 will be about introduction to internet and the World Wide Web, and we start with it, the first lesson, looking at the overview of the internet. So you'll look at a basic definition of an internet and what is an internet. The reason we are looking at it because when you build your systems and deploy them, they're going to communicate over the internet using some protocols, and therefore it is very important for you to understand how the World Wide Web works and how does the internet communicate, how do the devices on the internet communicate with each other. So we are saying that internet is a simple interconnection of several networks. So, and what is a network? Once you have two devices connected to each other, two or more devices, then you automatically form the network. And therefore, when you have several networks connected or interlinked together, then you form the big network called the internet. All right. So the devices on the internet communicate using some defined rules. We call them the protocols. It is just like you go and meet with someone on the road and you want to communicate, you want to start a conversation. There has to be some rules followed in those communication. First of all, you must be able to make sure you're communicating in the same language. Secondly, you must be able to speak and wait for the other person to respond. And these are rules you follow in day-to-day communication. The same thing applies to the devices on the internet. For one computer to communicate to another, it has to follow some defined rules called the protocols. An example of some protocols on the internet are the TCP IP protocol, in full meaning transport communication protocol or internet protocol, HTTP, HTTPS, SMTP, and FTP. So you can as well do more research on other protocols that are used on the internet and what are their specific uses. All right. So in this course, we will be working mostly with HTTP and HTTPS protocols. Later on in the course, we will be able to understand what are these protocols and what are they used for. After dividing the internet, let me pause a bit and ask, am I being too fast or I'm moving at a good pace?
We okay.
Okay. Then we have the World Wide Web, which mostly you will see it written www.com. What is that? So the World Wide Web is one of the internet services. Once you have an internet or once you have a network and the devices are connected, then you can be able to perform so many things on the internet. For example, you can be able to send an email, you can be able to share files on the internet, you can be able to browse the websites. So one of the services provided by the internet is the World Wide Web. So what is it? A World Wide Web is a system of interlinked web pages or documents or resources that you can access over the internet using the browser. All right. So when I come to my browser, for example, let me assume this is my browser, open a new tab and visit, maybe let me visit YouTube. I want to visit the YouTube website. So when I visit YouTube's website, you can see that they have their own website here. And on this YouTube website, you can access so many resources. You can access videos, you can access postings, whatever that has been posted on this website, you can browse. So, and when you click, you see these are links. When I click on this link, for example, I am able to see uh, this content here displayed. I click on this one, I'm able to display this content here. So this system of interlinked content is what we are calling the World Wide Web. And the World Wide Web uses three technologies. It uses the HTML, it uses the HTTP or HTTPS, and it uses the uniform resource locators. So these three concepts are key, and we shall see their uses later when we start writing the code. So for you to design a page like this, you'll have to use HTML, which is the hypertext markup language. And for you to be able to communicate between your browser, right now I'm within my browser, and this content is coming from the YouTube server. For me to be able to communicate between my browser and the YouTube server, I must use some protocol, and that protocol is the HTTP or HTTPS. And that's why when you look at this URL here, you can see there's this protocol HTTPS, then the domain name, which is the YouTube. So here I'm using a protocol. The whole of this thing here is what we are calling it the uniform resource locator, URL. Alright, so I must provide a URL like this to be able to access a content that I want to access. So that is it. That is a brief overview of the World Wide Web. You can still do more research at your own time and learn more about the World Wide Web. After introducing the World Wide Web, let's look at a brief history how the web has evolved from the beginning 1991 to the present day. So the guys who designed the World Wide Web, they are called, the other guy is called Tim Berners with the other two of his colleagues. So in 1991 they came together and decided how can we be able to share the documents. Let's say I have a document in my computer and I want to be able to make it public so that others can be able to access and view it anywhere in the world. How can I do that? And therefore they created this World Wide Web. And the first thing they came up with was to create a website which is static, a website which contains only published information. And when you have a content on your computer, you can be able to publish it on the web, and the other person can be able to browse, search for it, and be able to view that content. So that was the first evolution of the web. And then it came the Web 2. So that was Web 1. Then in Web 2, which started in 2004 to the present day, we had the concept of social web, whereby the websites are no longer just a static website where you can just view, but you can as well have some level of interactivity, in the sense that you can be able to click around the website, you can be able to post some data on the website, you can be able to view some data on the website. An example of this could be a YouTube website, Facebook website. Right now when you go to Facebook, you can be able to view the content posted by others. You as well can be able to post your own content, and you can also be able to click on some buttons and have some level of interactive websites or web apps. So this evolution of web is what we call it the Web 2. Then from there we came to Web 3, which started, this evolution started from 2014 to the future, and this concept is called the decentralized web. And this is where you will hear concepts like the blockchain technology, the cryptocurrencies, the machine learning, generative AI, natural language processing. So the main idea behind this is to have to make the web intelligent and to make the web decentralized and user owned. So if you have a passion of learning the blockchain technology, you will get to understand more about what decentralized web means. So these are the three stages through which the World Wide Web has evolved over the time. All right. Then we come to lesson 2 and see how the web works. And before I go to lesson 2, please, if you have a question, ask before we proceed. Any question? Right. So if there is no question, I believe we are all familiar with this. In lesson 2, we look at how the web works. So we have said the web is a concept of being able to share documents on the internet, and we know what internet is. Let's see how does it work. How do we share internet? How do we share documents? I mean, how does that concept work? So the World Wide Web uses a model or communication model called client server model. In this model, it is where we have two computers. One computer acts as a client, the other one acts as a server. So the client device is a program or a computer that makes a request, e.g. the web browser. And then the server is the computer which contains the content now, and it listens the request is sent by the clients, and then it gives back the response, which is the content. All right. A typical example is when I'm browsing YouTube, like this one here. This my computer that I'm using, or the web browser here, is my client. So when I click on this, for example, podcasts, I click here, I'm making a request. I'm sending a request to the YouTube server. So there is a server somewhere which contains all this content of podcasts. And therefore, when I send that request, the server is able to send me a response with all this content displayed here. All right. So this is the basic way on how the client, this is what we mean by the client server communication model. So it involves 3 steps. The first thing is that the client sends a request to the server processes the request, and then the server sends the response to the client. And the response we're talking about there is nothing but the content that is sent back to the client. All right. So why is this important? It is because the application we are going to build, we're saying it's a full stack class. So in the full stack class, we are going to build a client, we are going to build a server, and we are going to make them communicate to each other. We're going to send a request to our server, and the server is going to send us the response. And how are we going to build the server? I mean the client. We build the client using the React framework or library, and we're going to build the server using the express.js. May I add express here, express.js. So we're going to build a server which contains the API. What is an API? Application Programming Interface. I don't know if you are making notes somewhere. So an API is Application Programming Interface. An API is a way the client is able to communicate to the server. So when I click on this tab here, I am basically calling some API which is on the server, and that API has some logic which is going to process my request, and then it is going to get the data that I've requested for. So that is what we mean by client server communication model, is what is used in this full stack development. You can see the diagram is displayed here. So we have clients here. The client can be a desktop computer, it could be a laptop, it could be a mobile phone. Maybe you are browsing your YouTube on your mobile. It could be a tablet or any front-end client device. The server is a computer which contains those information, and those information, I mean the server contains the API, all right, and then the actual data is stored in the database. So we will have a database, we will have a server, we will have a client. The database we are going to use is Mongo database. Apart from Mongo database, do you know of any other database? If the question is yes, I don't want an answer, but if you know, well. If you don't know, apart from Mongo database, there are several other databases. For example, MySQL database, Postgres database, which other database you know that I have forgotten, Oracle database, Microsoft SQL database, and many others. So why are we choosing Mongo database? Why are we not using MySQL, for example, or Postgres? So there are so many types of database. The choice of your database depends on your application needs. All right. In our case, because we are going to use React and Express, Express works well with Mongo database, and that's why we made a choice of using the Mongo database. Right. So the next concept I want us to look at is this protocol called the HTTP and the HTTPS protocols. So we say that these are the two protocols, or in short you can call them rules, that define how the client and the server talk to each other over the internet. And you have seen them in the earlier demonstrations. When we look at this URL on top here, you can see in this URL or in this link, by the way, a link is what we are calling it the URL here in layman's terms. So it is real name is the URL, but of course a normal person will call it a link. So in this link here, you can see that there is this protocol called HTTPS. So without this protocol, this client cannot be able to communicate to the server. So what is the difference between the two, or what is the uses, what is the purpose of that protocol there? So the purpose or the use of these protocols is to transfer the data between the client and the server. And what is that data? The data could be images, the data could be notes, the data could be videos, data could be any content that you are able to see. So when you come here, the data you are displaying here, you can see we have videos, we have text which is here, you can even have images. All those are the different data that you can be able to transfer between the client and the server. So then what is the difference between the HTTP and the one with HTTPS? So the only difference is that HTTP does not encrypt the data while it is being sent between the client and the server. So that is to say that it is less secure, because if the data is not encrypted, this concept encryption is very important. I want you to mark it. We'll look at it later. If the data is not encrypted, then the hacker can be able to intercept it and therefore interfere with your communication or even hack your communication. By default, HTTP uses port 80 by default. So what is port? What is the port number? When we go later deeper in the course, we will look at the concept of the ports. So what happens is that any application which is deployed on the server must be assigned a specific port on which it runs. Note that down. Then the HTTPS, it is more secure than the HTTP, and therefore it encrypts the data and it uses port 443 by default. So the request and the response between the client and the server are sent using the HTTP protocols. How to encrypt data in our application? We will look that we will be able to write a code that will be able to make sure our data is encrypted. Right? So that is all about the concept of the two protocols which are used in this web communication. There are other protocols, but they are not very much important when it comes to this course. Then we look at the concept of request and response in client-server model. We have been talking about the server must send the client must send a request, and then the server must send back a response which contains the data. What is that request and what is that response? How do they look like? So I'm using some few data. If in case I drop, please make sure to, if someone who has my call, just call me. I might be talking here and then I have dropped. Otherwise I can see I'm still in the meeting. So let's go back. So we are saying that request and response, what are these? So when the client is sending the request, it uses something called HTTP methods. So there are HTTP methods that define what action the client wants the server to do. Alright. So when the client is communicating with the server, it has to tell the server explicitly what it needs, or what it wants the server to do for him. Or I mean, I'm using the persona here, what the client wants the server to do. All right. So an examples of these methods are get. So there is HTTP method called get, and that get method, the client, when the client uses the get method, it means that it wants the server to retrieve some data. So it is like the client wants to fetch some data from the server. When the client uses a method called post, then the client wants to send some data to the server. For example, I am making a YouTube video and I want to post it on YouTube on my channel. So if I post it, if I want to send data to the server to be stored on the server, I must communicate using HTTP method called post. We will see that when we write code. Then we have a method called put. The put means that when we use the method called put, it means we want to update some data on the server. For example, I have a YouTube channel here. Let me go to my YouTube channel here, and this is my YouTube channel. You can see I have several videos. So let's say I want to edit these videos, so I can click on this one and then I can edit it. Maybe I want to change the title of the video, or I want to change the thumbnail image which is displayed here. So when I want to change some content on the server, then I have to communicate to the server using the put method. Then finally we have another method called the delete. So delete, it means that I want to remove some content from the server. Maybe this is my video and now I'm not comfortable with it anymore. I want to delete it. So once I click on the delete method, I'm sending a request to the server, telling I'm sending the request to the server with a method delete. So when the server sees the method delete, it knows that I have to delete this content. All right. These are just, I want to say, please note, these are just conventional methods. You can as well alternatively use post to delete a content, and that has no problem. But conventionally, or the standard way of using it, is to use each method for a specific task. Any question up to there? Any question up to there? Alright, so if there is no question, we proceed. So we are saying that each response from the server comes with a status code. So once the server gets the request, and then now when it is responding with the data, the server also sends some code to tell the client what has happened, whether the response is coming successfully, or whether there is some failure on the server, or whether there is some error. You realize that sometimes when you try to browse some content, then you get some error from the website telling you that this content is not found, or some errors occurred. So those communications, so once there is an error, or once the content which is requested is not there, then the server also has to appropriately communicate back to the client, telling them that an error has occurred, and it does that using some status code. All right, so it does that using some status code, and here you can see there a list of a status code with their meanings. These ones are very important as you become a full stack developer, more especially those ones who will be using the backend development. So you need to understand this status code. So when you see 200, when the server responds with the status code 200, it means okay, it means the response has been processed successfully. Once you see the status code 201, it means that there is some resource which has been created. Maybe you are posting something and the server has created that content successfully. When you see the status code 400, it means that a bad request. It means that the way the server is expecting you to communicate is not the way you have sent. Maybe, for example, let's say you are signing up, you are registering on some website, okay, and then that website requires you, when you are registering, you must provide your first name, second name, email address, and phone number. And then when you miss to provide phone number and you send the request with a missing phone number, you see the server realizes that there is some missing content or there's some invalid inputs, and therefore it sends you a response with a status code 400 and a message reading bad request. Bad request meaning that the content you are trying to send to me does not match with what I'm expecting. All right. Then we have another status code 404. 404, it means the content you are trying to access from the server does not exist, or it is not there, in short. So maybe you've realized this instance whereby you go and type, let me type some imaginary website which does not even exist. You see, let me say .com. Let me type something that does not exist. See, this website does not exist anywhere, and therefore if it does not exist, the server responds with you with some error. Once you try to look at this response more closely, you would realize that when you look at this response here, my computer is hanging a bit. You will see that it is sending you some errors here, telling you that maybe the content is not displayed, or it can even read here telling you that did not match any document, so it means that this content is not found. So these are an effective way of the server communicating back to the client. Then we have another status code 500. When you see a status code of 500, it means that there is some error occurring on the server. Maybe the server is down, or some code is breaking on the server that is giving you some errors. So these are just but few examples of a status code. There are so many other status code, and I also want to give you a task to go at your own time and do a research on the status codes or HTTP status codes, and you'll be able to see a list of all of them and read and see what do they mean when you see that response or when you see that status code. Any questions so far? Welcome, Samuel. We have just started, and we are in lesson 2 of introduction to the internet. I will share the notes with you guys later, so you've come in a bit late, but you can still catch up. Samuel, can you confirm you can hear me? Hello, Samuel. The other guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. All right. So if there's no question, we proceed. So then let's look a bit about the concept of IP addresses and the ports and the URLs. Explain these three concepts. What do you understand by an IP address? Let me ask a question, pose a question. What do you understand by these three terms? The IP address, the port, and the URL. Anyone who has a clue? It may also involve some participation. You can just unmute and just say anything. There is no wrong or right answer. If you have any clue about these three concepts, more especially the port. Anyone with a clue? Alright, so if there's no one with a clue, I want to believe that you guys know, but you don't want to speak out. Let's make this class very interactive so that I'm also able to, you see, when you answer, then I'm also able to gauge your understanding and know how deep should I explain or how shallow should I explain so that we can move with a slow speed or fast speed. All right, you can even chat. If you are not in position to speak out, you can chat in the chat box and just send your answers there. So if you have a clue, just chat as I continue explaining. All right. And then okay, so let me break it down and look at these three concepts. So when talk about an IP address, the IP address is a unique number identifying each computer on the internet. We have talked about the internet. We said internet is a large interconnection of devices or networks. So each computer on the internet has a unique IP address, just like each one of you has a unique ID number. You have an ID card with a unique ID number. No two citizens can have the same ID number. So the same thing on the internet, each computer has a unique number assigned to it called the IP address. And it is this IP address that is used to communicate between the computers, so that if computer A wants to communicate to computer to computer B, then it must first of all know about that computer's IP address. Once it knows that computer's IP address, then it can send a message to it. Alright, so these are unique numbers which are used for communication. You can go and do more research on IP address and see how IP addresses are written and what is the format of writing the IP addresses. Then we have two types of IP address. We have IP address version 4, then we have IP address version 6. So also go and look on the differences between the two. Then the port number. So a port number is a number on the device that is used to run a specific service or application. For example, now when you come to my computer right now, on my laptop, this laptop now, for it to be online, it has an IP address. So when I go to my command prompt, okay, so I go to my command prompt, and why my computer is slow today, and I type IP config. Let me run IP let me open it again here, command, it is not giving that, but it should give the IP address of this computer here. Let me run it as administrator. Command prompt, then run, right click on it, then run as administrator, click yes. It's not showing, but when you type IP configuration, you'll be able to see the IP address of your computer. So in short, IP address is a specific number assigned to that device so that you can be able to communicate. Then the port number, so when you look at this computer right now, I have so many applications running on this. So you can see I have a web browser running here. Then I have this other application called OBS. I have this other application called Visual Studio, and these other ones here. So when you open this application here, you can see that there are so many services which are running on these computers. So all these services that are running here, each service, for it to run, for it to be identified on this computer, it must be assigned a specific port number for it to run. So that number is what you're calling the port. So even later when we write our front-end client and we write the back-end server, for you to deploy them on the computer, you'll be able to deploy them on a specific port number. Then we have the concept of the URL. So a URL is a complete address that you can use to access the resource on the server. And what is the format of the URL? So you can see the format of the URL is in this form. So the format of the URL starts with the protocol that we are using, then the IP address or the domain name of that website that we want to access, and then the port number, and lastly the path. So once, for example, here once we access the YouTube, you can see that whatever we are accessing here, this is the URL. So you can see it is in that format that we are describing. We have the protocol part here, then the colon // we have the domain name here, then slash, we have the path of the content. So here it means that we want to access this particular channel, right? So this is the typical format of the URL or the uniform resource locator. It is the path or the link that you will use to access any particular content on the web. So having differentiated between the three terms, then let's look at the next concept called the domain name system. So what is a domain name system, and what is it used for on the web, and how is it applicable when it comes to full stack development? So we are saying that the domain name system is a system that converts the IP addresses. I can see Calvin is asking a question here. Can the two devices have the same IP address? No. That's Aisha. So the two devices cannot have the same IP address. Each device has a unique IP address. Alright. So we go back to the content. So we are saying that the domain name system, it's a system that converts or resolves the domain names into an IP address. I believe you have heard about the concept of a domain name. What's a domain name? And you've probably heard when you develop a website, you need to buy a domain name for it, and then you need to register the domain name, and then you need to host the website. What is that concept of a domain name? So normally what happens is that computers do not understand the human languages. So computers normally communicate using numbers, zeros and ones. So for a computer to be able to communicate with another computer, it needs to know the IP address of that computer. And normally the IP address is written in the form of 4 numbers separated by commas. For example, this is an example of an IP address. It could be 126.2.4.6. So if I have the IP address like this, then I can be able to talk or communicate to this computer with this IP address. But these IP addresses are very difficult to be memorized by human beings. We humans, we are poor in numbers. That's why if someone gives you their number today and they give you their name, you are most likely to remember their name as opposed to remembering the number, unless you are going to register it somewhere and write it on your phone book. So because we are poor with numbers, let me just pause here. I buy another new data so that I don't drop off. Just give me some few minutes. I renew my data connectivity. Yeah. Hey, that's good. This way. Wow. Mhm. Hello? Can someone confirm that you can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. I think my data got depleted, so I had to repurchase. Okay. Sorry for the inconvenience. Let me see if there's someone who has chatted on the text. In case you have any question or clarification, just type your question in the chat box. I'll be able to see it. Oh, someone is asking, can I join, please? I dropped out. Someone by the name Sisha, can you confirm you're in the meeting, or I can send you the link in the inbox? Sisha, who's Sisha? And just a minute, let me send them the link so that they can be able to join. Think they have a problem joining. All right, let's proceed. So I was saying that the domain name, because computers use the numbers like this, and we cannot be able to memorize these numbers, so people came up with a domain name, so that when you have a website you want to host, you must first of all have create a domain name for it, and then the domain name will be linked to the IP address. So we will have a table where we have two columns, the domain name and its corresponding IP address, domain name and its corresponding IP address, so that if I want to communicate, I simply type, for example, let's take this domain name youtube.com. youtube.com is the domain name for YouTube, but behind the scenes this domain name is linked to some IP address which we don't have to know. All right, so when we type the domain name in the browser, for example youtube.com, what normally happens first is that this computer will send a request. Before it sends a request to the YouTube, it will first send a request to the domain name server. So we have a domain name server which is seated on the internet. It is the public server which can be accessed by anybody. So the role or the purpose of that server is to keep a record of all the domain names which are on the internet and their corresponding IP addresses. So what will happen first, this browser of mine will send a request to that domain name server. Then the domain name server is going to send them back the exact IP address of that domain. Then after the client gets the IP address, the client computer now uses that IP address to communicate to the YouTube. All right. So that is how it communicates. That is how the communication happens. So in short, what happens is that when a user types the domain name in the browser, the first thing that happens is that the browser checks in the local cache to see if it knows the IP address of that domain. If it doesn't know the IP address, then the browser sends the request to the domain name server to convert it. Then the domain name will convert that domain to an IP address, and then it will send that IP address back to the browser. Then the browser will make a second request to that IP address, and then it will load the content or the website. Are we clear? All right, so that's how communication happens when you are browsing any particular, when you are browsing a new website. But if it's the website you have already browsed, so what happens normally, the browser keeps some local cache of some IP address that it has visited before. So if it is the domain that you have already visited before, then the browser will use its cache to get the IP address instead of querying the domain name server. So you can see that this is a diagram here. I have put this diagram so that they normally say the diagram communicates better than the notes. So you can see that in this diagram, here is the browser, here is the web server which contains the content. You can take it, an example could be, this could be an example of Facebook server, or it could be an example of YouTube server, or it could be an example of your own website that you have. This one here is the domain name server, which contains all the list of IP address, of the domain names and the IP addresses. So when the browser wants to get content from this website, it will type the domain name for this website. Let us say the domain name for this website is www.example.com. So when you type this domain name here, browser will first send a request to the DNS server, and the DNS server is going to respond with the IP address of this server. Then the browser is going to take this IP address and then request the web server for the content, and you can see the web server now sends back the content. This could be a document which is being sent here back to the server to be displayed. So that is how a communication happens in this kind of manner. Any questions so far? We are done with module 1, which was just a basic fundamental introduction to the internet and the World Wide Web. I can see someone has a question, so you can proceed and ask your question.
Let me go first. I was trying to understand how IP address and port them to the URL functions, or how they are related.
You are trying to understand how the IP address, the port are created.
Yeah. How they are related? How do they function? It's like IP address and port. I think they are one. They do the same function.
Yes, but not really the same function. So what happens is that the 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 URL in full, the URL has this format. Let me go back to this content here of the URL. So when you look at this link here, it has 3 parts. We have the protocol part, which tells us which protocol are we using at the moment. Then we have this second part, which gives us the domain name together with the port. All right, so this domain name is an IP. It can be used, this could be an IP address, because each domain name has a corresponding IP address. Then after the IP address, or after the domain name, we have the port number. Then after the port number, we have the path of that specific content. So what is the difference between the IP address and the port number? The IP address helps us to identify a computer on the internet. It just helps us to identify a computer or a server on the internet. But now once we get to that server, there are so many applications running on that server. Each application runs on a specific port. So the port now will help us to identify a specific application. Are you together? So the IP address identifies the computer as a whole. The port identifies the application within that computer. So that is the difference between the two.
I understand. Thank you, sir.
All right. Let me open it here just to show it before we even go to. I had some application I developed here. Let me run it. Close this. See, like I had this application here. Let me run it using the command don't be bothered about what is this typing, but we will be able to see it later. So this is my front-end application that I'm running. So a front-end is an application. You can see I'm starting it now, and it's starting. Once it starts, it will display the content in the browser, and you will be able to see the IP address, the port number, and the protocol that I'm using. So just give it some few seconds. It is starting now. I think my computer is hanging because I'm running too many applications here. Let me pause this.